Our goal is to start out with just a little bit of introduction. Each of our panelists is going to give us a minute or two about their context, where they are coming from. We have farmers, we have consultants, we have a manufacturing company CEO, so we have different perspectives, different ages. They are all thinking about organics from the inside and to some extent from the outside, okay? So we'll start with that, and then I will open up with a few questions. At any point that you really have a burning question, make sure that you let me know that I can come bring you the mic, and you're welcome to ask a question, okay? But we want this to be really practical. We want this to be really engaging. And that means that you have to do your part as being engaged listeners, okay? So why don't we let's start with, you have the mic, so okay. We'll start with Eric.
Is this on? Okay.
Yep.
All right, my name is Eric Falcon. I farm 2,250 acres irrigated in eastern Nebraska. This is actually last year a transition for the majority of it. A little bit of background. I lived and worked up at Gary Zimmer's place for a couple years. I was a sales agronomist for Midwestern BioAg. There was a little too much sales and not enough consulting in there, so I moved back to my wife's family's place. The older generation was in the process of leaving, and the younger generation wanted something a little different. So, like I said, 2,250 acres, grow corn, soybeans, yellow peas, have a herd of fall calving cattle. We bring in cattle from other cattlemen in the area. So at the peak, we're probably close to 1,000, 1,100 head cattle on the farm at any one time. Lots of cover crops, things that way.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bob. I said Bob, not Eric, because, guys, if any of you anybody look at Ag Talk? New Ag Talk? So, he posts as Bob C. I don't know why. Bob C. Okay, well, maybe someday he will reveal where Bob C comes from, but Eric Falcon, thank you. Okay, Will.
Will Glazik, and like I said earlier, I grew up on a 400-acre mixed row crop livestock organic operation, raising corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, and grass-fed beef. We also have some hogs and chickens, and then I started my own farm 3 years ago. I have 160 that's certified this year, 80 that's in second year transition, and then I do consulting on as a full-time job, where I get the privilege to go around and to work with and learn from countless other farmers. So
sounds good. Gary.
I'm Gary McDonald from Central Illinois. I grew up on a farm, started farming in 1980. 1981 was my first crop on an organic system. It was a livestock and row crop farm. What I specialize in now is to help farmers with their weed control, marketing, or any aspect of the organic process, and also farm a little bit.
Sounds good. When I showed you the modified IH-153, Gary built that for us. He has come out multiple times. We hired him as a consultant initially, and then I think he's just continued to be really charitable with his time. But make sure that we're paying you. He's worth a lot. And he built that cultivator out of, how many do you think went into that?
Three cultivators. It takes 3 cultivators to make one.
Okay. Let's have some words from our next.
My name is Joe Bassett. I'm the president and CEO of Dawn Equipment and our new enterprise, which is Underground Agriculture. We design mechanical devices for planters, automation products for planters, and recently I've kind of become interested in, as we're pushing the automation trends in some aspects of agriculture, just looking at investigating the idea of what is complexity and what kind of the end game is, and it occurred to me that while input suppliers are kind of capturing a lot of the value creation on most farms, so I'm interested in agriculture systems that maximize return on investment per acre, and we're really interested in organic no-till because I think it will maximize return on investment per acre, and B, because it's a hard problem, and hard problems are good business opportunities. And so we're kind of taking an experimental approach and making a range of products specifically devoted towards intensive cover crop farming.
Thank you very much, Joe. So I'm going to open with a question. He just mentioned hard problems are good for people that are innovative, right? You can get compensated if you are good at solving the hard problems. I sometimes joke with my students about idiot-proof agriculture. Agriculture is never truly idiot-proof, right? There are no technologies that solve all your problems, but we have done an amazing job in our modern production systems to make it very formulaic, where one guy, 70 years old, can farm 1,500 acres with a half-time employee. It's just unbelievable how streamlined we've made things. But that is obviously not the formula for profits, to make it that easy, right? And once again, I'll say it is not easy, but we have solved all sorts of problems with our technologies that make it possible to do these amazingly efficient things. Anyway, let's start with the idea of the low-hanging fruit, the opposite of the hardest problems. What do you see as the things that you think can be most easily fixed on organic farms? The things that you see as, if they would just make this change, they would do better.
I've been on my share of organic farms too with BioAg, and again, if you read Ag Talk, you'll know I'm a biology first guy, and if you start to understand how to manipulate the biology, I think the weed control becomes, I don't want to say easy, it's always difficult, but much, much easier. And the second thing is, and you touched on this earlier today, organic farmers are famous for 30 pieces of equipment, and I think they're especially susceptible to this product and that product. The majority of the time, paying closer attention to detail with the tools that you do have, I think is really important, especially when it comes to tillage, to mechanical weed control, and now coming to like cover crop selection and back to biology, understanding what you're doing with biology with your crops.
Okay. Will, what do you think?
I think a lot of farmers could really solve their weed control problems, their fertility problems, and pest problems with one portion of the farm is fallow every year.
So when you say fallow, what does that mean to you? That means different things. Some people think of fallow as bare fallow, nothing growing. But obviously fallow can be vegetative fallow. What are you meaning when you say fallow?
Cover crop fallow, where it's either annual cover crops or perennial cover crops. It can be a mix of grasses and legumes, or just legumes or broadleaves. Ideally, you'd make money on it by grazing, but I still see good profit potential even just by mowing it and letting it rot on the ground.
Okay. What do you think, Gary?
I'm going to add what these guys said, and I can't add much, but it's very simple for me. I think weed control is really simple, but it's on the back of the operator, the person that's on the tractor, the person that's making the go, no-go decision. And if your soil's hungry, it's going to grow weeds. If you're putting back plenty of cover crops and green manure crops, and I try to grow 2 crops a year, one for the soil, one for me, and there's 1 year out of 4, it's all going to go to the soil, 100% of it. And when you do that, your foxtail disappears, and your weeds, most of them disappear. And my objective is to get the corn knee-high before a weed shows up, and the beans knee-high before a weed shows up. Cultivation is treating a symptom.
Okay, that's thought-provoking. Now we have, a different perspective, maybe a machine-oriented perspective, or maybe not.
I think the low-hanging fruit is setting up your planters so that you're going to have success. So if you're planting in a cover crop, make your planter extremely heavy. There is no planter on the market that is from the factory heavy enough. So make sure you have 500 pounds of frame weight per row and an automatic down pressure control system, and there's no reason even and the other low-hanging fruit is plant the cereal rye very thick, right? And just set yourself up for success. If you're growing soybeans into cereal rye, there's no reason if you plant 180,000 that you can't get 160 or 170,000 out of it just because it's no-till. A lot of times the system is getting blamed for failing when in reality you have a mechanical or an equipment problem that is actually the problem.
Well, one thing I will just share, we have great farmers in this community that are not going to help us solve all of our organic problems, because some of our problems are just not things they think about. But they are great at mechanical problem solving. And if you have neighbors that you're not talking to when you are trying to get your equipment to work better, you should be talking to your neighbors. The guys that farm here and our other neighbors are just really helpful. When we're trying to run a guidance system and we need just some reminders about how to set up the AB line or other types of technology things, the local farmers are very, very helpful. How about, we've had a number of consultants talk today. Let's think about what a consultant does. They diagnose problems, they crop scout. Just tell us whatever you want to share about how you go out and do whatever type of crop scouting you do. How do you do it? How do you approach that?
Well, I wish I could see every field every day. I mean, it changes time of the year, whether it's cover crop establishment or a tillage pass. Tillage on my farm is micromanaged as much as anything. I usually set up all the tillage tools that people use. As far as in season, I can't cover all the acres. We do hire a crop scout, and he's new to the organic system, but he's excellent on foliar disease and insects and things like that. So I rely on him pretty hard. But I do hit every field every week.
If I'm doing my job right, then I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I'm trying to train the farmer to be an agronomist themselves.
So how's that working? I mean, do you feel like you've worked yourself out of some jobs?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's good. They're smarter, more knowledgeable farmers.
Excellent. That's what we want all of you to be thinking as you drive away, that you're a smarter, more knowledgeable farmer or whatever it is that you do. What do you think, Gary?
Well, Joel, I'm not really a crop scouting type person because the agronomy part of it is not what I focus on. It's more operational. I feel we can solve a lot of problems with our health if we go and get exercise and eat right and get our sleep and stuff like that, and so we can stay away from the doctor. And that's the way I think of the soil. It's a living creature. I'm going to do what I can to feed it a whole food diet, give it some rest, and take proper care of it. And therefore, I've never had the problems I hear about all the time with cutworms. And I'm glad I got a few, because what are my birds going to eat? You know, wire worms and what the army worms I heard this year. And I've never had to worry about them. I let Mother Nature take care of that, like that's her job, not mine. It's my job to make sure she has plenty to nourish her and feed her, and she'll take care of the rest. So I've never had to be an agronomist or someone who does a soil test. In fact, I have never, ever paid for a soil test or taken one. I feed the biology. The biology, earthworms can take care of the fertility needs in your biology if they're not starving to death. If your cattle were dying from starvation, you wouldn't call the vet and have them draw blood to see if the cow needs phosphorus or potash. You're going to get a bale of hay into the animal. And 99% of the farms, your farm's starving to death. You feed the soil, and that's going to take care of your problems. I think 100% of your problems myself. And that's what I've done for my whole career in organic agriculture.
Very interesting. So, Joe, you have maybe a...
I'm a non-expert, so I'll pass on this.
You're not scouting in the same sense, but you probably do go out and watch how your equipment is running. I know your dad came down and worked with us a little bit. How do you bring that awareness to your company?
We're doing tons and tons of field demonstrations. So for instance, now we're experimenting with a new product called the Romo, which is a product that doesn't have distinct use case. So about 3 years ago, when we started getting into the roller crimping systems in organic no-till soybeans, we'd get really, really good weed control like 75% of the time. and then the other 75% or the other 25% of the time was really, really bad. And so, you know, I started saying, okay, well, what's holding up success in the system? Well, the other 25% of the time is holding up success in the system. So you've got your organic field, and you've got the inevitable outbreak of some sort of water hemp or ragweed or whatever. Well, what do you do? And I thought, well, we'll take a high clearance vehicle and we'll make this row crop mower that deflects the canopied crop material around the outside, and we'll just hack down the weeds. But I really feed off the farmer innovation because I'm not an agronomist, I'm not a farmer. I've actually never farmed in my life, so I love events like this because I'm actually listening to the needs of the farmer and then trying to go where the ball's going. People have decided to use this product for kind of living mulch cover crop systems, and that's an area I'm really experimenting in, because I'm interested in systems that are absolute extreme, right? If you say, okay, what is the absolute extreme of input cost reduction, where you're basically applying no fertilizer, you're applying no herbicides or anything to it, and then what, you know, like you said, the big wins and the big money is to be made at the hard end of the spectrum. And so the idea of next year we're going to be running this Romo device where you can, people will be growing like a living mulch of clover, and then it's designed to mow the clover, but then we're working on an effective way to get it to discharge, so it'll discharge the clippings towards the side so that it's basically creating this kind of mulch over the top of the root zone area that then breaks down. And basically, I don't actually think it'll work. And so if you have very low expectations, then you can set yourself up to be surprised.
That sounds good. Okay, one of the things that I struggle with is setting priorities. Sometimes there's just so many needs, so many things that need to be done, and I don't think I always choose the thing that's most important to do. I might choose the thing that is most logical. You know, I understand how to do it. Going out and pulling weeds is probably not the most important thing to do sometimes, but that might be the thing that I know exactly how to do it, right? There are all sorts of things where we have to figure out how to set priorities because we have a limited amount of time, limited resources. We often are operating at kind of the edge of the scale that works for us, and then all of a sudden we have extreme weather, or we have something else that pushes us beyond that scale being, you know, really feasible. So what do you think about in terms of figuring out either on a day-to-day basis or a longer-term basis about how to set priorities?
On a day-to-day basis, they're usually pretty clear what they are, and it's generally a matter of triage. What you can do and get there and be effective, what's too far gone, and what you could hold off on for another day or two. Or it seems like with the best intentions, the year is planned perfectly. Something's going to happen at some time, and it causes a lot of stress. Those decisions are really, really hard because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Maybe if you don't do a hill pass, you might get beat. You might. But if you're not in this field where we can still get weeds, you know, you'll definitely get beat. So it's those kind of decisions. Yeah.
I read a book called The Lean Farm, and it's on a vegetable grower that tried to really, really fine-tune his farming operation. And he talks a lot about movement, and different movement that has purpose, and different movement that you're just spinning in a circle. So I try to go about everything I do with movement of purpose, and I try to do things that are actually going to have long-term benefits rather than just short-term gains.
A baby with a poopy diaper is more important than an unborn child. Never create more babies than you can take care of. My dad taught me that in the very beginning when I started farming organically. I'd plant corn as fast as I could plant corn, but it was the day of the row crop cultivator, or rotary hoe, the cultivator or the planter stopped. Now, if you got a different labor situation than I had, then you can keep on planting maybe, but a lot of people will way create more responsibility than they can take care of, and they back themselves in a corner, and then it cascades, and it just sucks them under, and they have a disaster. So you never want to plant more babies than you can take care of. That's so vital and so important, and then you'll never get yourself backed into a corner where you start having to make the decision, what do you do first? You want to know what you need to do first before first gets here.
I would answer this question a little bit differently. So I would when I started getting interested in cover crops, I was looking at trends that were happening in the Chesapeake Bay watershed in southeastern Pennsylvania and the kind of increased regulatory pressure that they were having there. And I was sort of making the hedge that this type of regulatory environment would export itself around the country because of increased awareness around groundwater and other sorts of things, so that, again, we would just try and go to, skate to where the puck is going. But I'll tell an anecdote. Recently, my daughter goes to this little school. She's 3 at Northern Illinois University, and there's these twins there. And I met the father of these twins. They're from Tanzania, and they're in Africa. And he knows a lot about agriculture, actually. And we kind of got to talking one time at a birthday party about what was going on there. And I was thinking, about agriculture around the world and how the vast majority of farmers in the world don't even own a tractor. And so you have these people in these developing markets that, look, they never had a landline phone. They went directly from having no phone to having a cell phone. And I think, how amazing would it be if in these developing markets that they don't have to go through the 20th century of industrial biotech agriculture, if they could somehow transcend that and go directly to whatever the next thing is going to be. And the next thing will be something that will both make them more money and have reduced environmental impact. In some of the farming circles that I run in, talking about sustainability and talking about the environment is almost like a dangerous thing that you almost don't even talk about. And I think this group is probably different. I think there are some long-term macro trends that we have to be positioned for, and that's where we're kind of steering the ship.
Very interesting. So, guys, I could keep asking questions. That's what I do. But I would love to have some questions from the audience. Who has a question? Okay, Jacob.
So plenty of diversity on this panel. I'm curious your thoughts. So if we talk organic corn and soybeans in the upper Midwest, there's 2 trains of thought in terms of timing of running the planter. One train of thought is go as soon as it's practical and try to get your crop up and going ahead of the weeds, to the point that you made, Gary. There's another train of thought on the other end of you wait as late as possible and see how many flushes of weeds you can get through some sort of tillage practice. In your diverse experiences, are you a put it in the ground early and get ahead of the weeds, or are you a wait a while and get some weed flushes and then put the seed in the ground?
I'm simple because I'm wait a while and let the cereal rye grow. End of the conversation.
Okay, I'm definitely wait a while. I've never planted corn before the 20th of May, and I'm in central Illinois. Because, see, to feed the biology, the living creature, is more important than my pocketbook, because my pocketbook's going to run dry if I don't take care of the most important thing, and that's the soil, okay? So I'm going to raise the first crop for the soil, and if I terminate it first part of May, it grows a lot from the middle of April to the first part of May, and you get massive biomass and growth and nitrogen production and phosphorus and all these things that we talk about we need to feed the soil, and so I want to get that done. And
So
then
you're talking about a legume cover crop primarily,
or cereal
or a
rye.
mix.
So,
Okay, or cereal rye.
It's
Okay.
cereal rye, the same thing. And I've set myself up so I can handle that and get it from a living plant, a mulch, or whatever you want to call it, whether it be cereal rye that's 11 foot tall or alfalfa that's over knee high, and get that from that stage to a seed bed as quickly as possible with the tillage practices I use.
I'm making a bit of a transition. I had been planting later, and I'm still going to plant my corn later. But this year, I've been no-tilling beans the last 3 years with the rolled rye system. And this year, when I planted my beans May 9th, and then I went ahead and I terminated the cover crop, I had to use a flail mower, not a roller this year, because it wasn't thick enough to crimp. But So I did that first week of June. So I had 3 weeks of growth on the beans before I terminated the rye. And I got some great looking beans. And I'm really happy with the later planted corn too. It was May 19th.
I'm at the perfect time. It's not too early or too late. I'm kind of on Gary's page. Most guys in my neighborhood, conventional guys, will plant corn. April 20th would be perfect for them. If I plant corn April 20th, I'll get a 50% stand, maybe. I mean, at some point between April 20th and May 20th, it's going to get down to 50 degrees and rain, and they're going to rot. Optimum date for me is probably May 15th, and again, similar to Gary, the majority of the nitrogen for corn in particular is a legume cover crop, and about May 1st, depending on the year, May 1st, it really starts launching. So we could go from maybe 60 units on May 1st to 150 by, say, May 15th, something like that. That's one reason to plant later. The second reason is that usually end of May, you could find soil temps in the mid-70s, and the best weed control you'll ever find is a canopy. And so a lot of the stuff, I started planting May 10th this year. Me and the conventional neighbors tasseled on the same week, which isn't always great in an organic system, but it happened. So it seems like we catch up pretty quickly.
Okay, any other questions out of the audience? Guys, these are some interesting people. They have ideas they'd be happy to share, but they will respond to your questions, or my questions. Yes, wait just a second, let me bring you the mic. Molly.
Yeah, what's your ideal fallow year cover crop mix?
Okay, so if you're going to dedicate a whole year to just feeding the soil, how would you do that?
I have to disagree with my colleague here.
Okay.
My co-panelist. I want to rotate through as quickly as possible cattle cover crops really quickly. I'd never let anything sit when I could put cattle on it. Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for that one. I wouldn't let it sit fallow. You could get a lot of benefit out of grazing cover crop. If you want to do nothing, and I have transitioned land by grazing alone, and I only see benefit to grazing rather than letting it get over mature. Other people might have different perspective on that.
I mean, ideally you'd graze it. But where I don't have fence, I try to use red clover, alfalfa, and I've played around after mowing it down. Then I'll come in with a multi-species cover crop mix, and depending on the time of year, I might be putting in something like oats and peas in the spring, or like sorghum sudan grass, or sunflowers in the summer, and maybe even rye or radishes in the fall. And it doesn't come up as thick or as strong as if it's in clean tilled soil, but you can still get a pretty good stand of an annual crop into an established alfalfa, and that way you can spread your diversity out some.
Okay, out of 48 months, I have perennial legumes and grasses growing for 26 months out of the 48. My mix can vary a lot. The last time mix I put together was Balanza clover, which they say don't use in organic because it'll become a weed. I've never worried about anything like that. Brome grass, orchard grass, timothy. There's some other grasses, rye grasses. There's medium red clover that I add to it, 3 or 4 different kinds of alfalfa. My predominant is the clovers and alfalfa at about 6-7 pounds to the mix, and a total of 15. There's ladino, there's lespedeza, or alsac, not lespedeza. And so I put a whole large mix together, and I found I create a lot more biomass doing that. And I graze it as well. The soil is a rumen, it's a stomach, and I allow it to consume it. It's very efficient, creates no compaction, and I don't have to have fences.
So when are you planting that mix? How does that fit into your system?
Grasses in the fall. The grasses are seeded in the fall in the wheat. mixed in with the wheat or whatever I would sow, but I'm on wheat right now with what I'm doing for a small grain. And then in the spring, sometime in my part of the country, between March 15th and April 15th, then I interseed in the wheat with a drill of the alfalfas and clover that I've mixed, that I purchased mixed together and inoculated.
Okay.
Hey, Joel, can I ask a question of you and the researchers in the room?
Absolutely.
Something I'd like to propose. So,
Guys, we can take questions from any part of the room, including our panelists.
so I'm kind of uninitiated, so I've seen this kind of the fashion du jour in cover crop mixes is more and more and more and more mixes, like more and more species. And I drive a lot, so I listen to these podcasts, and I listened to this really interesting Radio Lab podcast that had this researcher from the University of British Columbia who was talking about plant communication among trees. And she did this experiment where she was exposing some trees to this carbon dioxide, and they were using radiocarbon dating or radiocarbon tracing in order to figure out how the carbon was moving between different plants. And my question for the research community would be, could somebody use a similar methodology to figure out which species of cover crops have the most synergistic effects with different cash crops by somehow measuring the plant communication between them?
That is a great question. I actually heard this podcast myself, okay, on Radio Lab.
It blew me away.
It's very good. And there are other things online, the same researchers, okay? There's I'm trying to think the name of I think it's called What Plants Talk About. It's also a great video that you can watch. There is an incredible amount of communication going on, and we're just starting to unravel that. I think what they were talking about with the forest work was the mother plants and the baby plants and how they how they have this synergy. Figuring out how to have a cover crop be the best primer for the following crop. That's clearly a very important mission. And it's going to take some combination of really innovative farmers and then scientists that like to do mechanistic work and figure out these little details of how we can use sophisticated methods like the radioactive labeling to figure out how that communication takes place. I'm in awe of that type of research. I don't personally do that research, but I really love talking to scientists that do that work. And what I think we need to do is find ways for the scientists that have the technologies and just the experience with that mechanistic work to not have to create the environment where the communication is taking place, but rather come out to the places where we have these really innovative farming systems and figure out why they are working, okay? Because when you have the scientist who's focused on mechanisms trying to grow the crops, they don't do a good job. When you have good farmers growing the crops, knowing that things are working but not knowing why, that's the opportunity for the scientists to come in and help figure out why. So I guess I would say if you are seeing interesting things happening on your farm, reach out to the local scientific community. And they may turn you down, but they may find it to be an amazing opportunity that they don't have to spend lots of effort failing at being an agronomist, and they can focus on doing good science on someone else's land where the crops are being grown well. Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly lots of anecdotal evidence of plant interactions. I guess I would say there are people like Lauren that are taking this to a larger scale, and they're actually measuring yield, and they are able to go beyond the anecdotes and really quantify the effects. And when I was talking about the Nuffield Scholarship, when Andy Howard went traveling around, that's a great compilation. But there are lots of stories that are parts of that Nuffield program, and lots of other stories compiled in other places. We just need to I think find the right connections between the people who are really good at growing crops, and they could be gardeners, and the people who are really good at measuring things, and bring them together.
There's a couple more
Yeah.
legumes I use in my mix. In that mix, I also use the yellow blossom, the white blossom, and the mammoth red clover. So there's 12 species I have in my mix. I couldn't remember them all.
So some of the rates in these very diverse mixes are very low. You know, you hear about these mixes, you might imagine, well, how in the world could you afford to spend that much money on cover crops? And some of the mixes are very expensive. You know, some people are spending more than $50 an acre. But my guess is that someone as shrewd or frugal as Gary is using low enough rates that the whole mix, even though it has 12 species, isn't so expensive. Do you know the cost?
It's less than $70, or somewhere between 50 and 70, but I'm not afraid of $100 because, you know, corn that makes 200 bushels the acre at $11 a bushel, $2,200 an acre. I mean, to not put some of that back in your soil, I mean, come on, we've got an opportunity to build terrific soil with the money we're getting for our crops. Why be greedy? The more you can't outgive this system. The more you give and the more you give, the more it grows and the more it gives back, and your soil can just get on a roll and gets fabulous. It gets like potting soil, and never in history has there been a better opportunity when you can sell corn for $11 or so, give or take a bushel, and soybeans $20, $22 give or take. I mean, why aren't we jumping on this opportunity to put it back in the soil, something that can make it fabulous soil and get it reproductive and not productive? Productive soil is killing us. You got to get away from productive soil and get your soil reproductive.
That's a good way to think about it. Okay, any other questions, or should I keep going? Yes? Okay.
I got one for the panel. If some of you maybe have read about Colin Seiss and, in his pasture farming that's over in Australia. You know, in this part of the world, if you were thinking about maybe trying to integrate a system to do something like that, how would you, what would, I'd like to hear you guys maybe brainstorm that a little bit.
Walter, could you explain a little bit more about, I didn't hear the first part. The mic was kind of mumbled.
Colin Seiss that's over in Australia, it's a pasture farming kind of a system. I think there's a perennial, and then there's the livestock, and then there's some a small grain in the system, etc. I mean, if you were going to maybe try to accept that, I mean, if somebody came to you with that question or challenge, how would you tackle it in this part of the country?
I'm not familiar with that system, but I think pretty much everyone on this panel runs some variety of what you're talking about. I mean, I graze and grow covers. I'm not on my small grain game. I wish I was, but we rely more on peas. But I think it's generally, I don't want to call it the same thing, but we're speaking the same language. It's just fitted to my circumstances and what the farm is expected to produce and can produce.
If we're thinking of the same system, I think what he's doing is he has a native warm season pasture that he's grazing really, really tight with sheep in the fall after he plants a winter annual grain. So then in their winters, the summer annual pasture, the warm season pasture goes physiologically dormant through the winter and allows a cool season grain to grow. And I think that can work out all right. I've tried raising corn in cool season pastures, and that doesn't work out very good.
Just to be clear, it's kind of back to what I said about organic farmers and trying to be too cute. Sometimes I think we try to get too cute and just don't get the job done. And getting into I don't know, these obscure, I'm not saying it's not meant to offend anyone, but sometimes I think we get too deep into some obscure system or tool or product, you know, that we've heard about in South Africa and try to fit it to what we're doing when we could just observe what happens on our own farm.
I had cattle through the 80s because I ran a cattle operation along with the organic farming. And back then we didn't understand some of the things that we've learned since, and that was I would take one cutting hay off a fourth of the ground because I had a 4-year rotation, and that was to keep my brood cows over the winter. And then I'd turn the cows and their calves out there, and they just had free run of that acreage for the rest of the year, and then it grew up through the winter, and the next spring I got the cows off before the last frost, or the last freeze, and then I'd go out there and work it up and it'd go to corn. My point in all this, there has been so much tremendous information learned from like the Greg Judys of the world, which Walter back here who asked the question knows who that is, and some of you know who he is, but the mob grazing concept, cattle in of themselves not managed correctly are not going to be as great an asset to building soil because they're like a bull in a china cabinet. What they don't tear up, they poop on. And you've got solar panels out there with all those plant leaves, and if the cattle are left to graze and keep the size of the solar panel area down because they're grazing it, eating it down short, we're harvesting sunlight. That's what builds soil. Cattle have no photosynthetic cell on their entire body. They do not build soil. Never have and never will. So we can't allow them to cut that pipeline from the sun to that plant to put exudates in the soil and build carbons in the body of the plant. So we have to use the cattle wisely, in my opinion.
Well, very well said. Thank you, Gary. So, let's carry on with this line of thinking, and please do wave your hand if you want to say something. One of the things I have noticed in agriculture as a whole, but also maybe especially in organics, because organics maybe is a little harder. People are looking for gurus. People are looking for somebody who's figured it out and has the system that you can just replicate. And I just don't think that's how it works. You guys are innovators that are hearing about other innovators. What's your thought on how you take away what's most useful from somebody who has a system, but it's not a system that really can just be replicated on your farm? How do you take away the information and make it relevant to you?
I'll make one point, which is that I strongly dislike the guruization of farming. Some people would have said my father was kind of a guru, but it's, I grew up in this whole period of, Francis Childs did this, or David Hula does this, or like that there's always some magic bullet out there. If I can just follow what this one guy did, it's one of the aspects of American agriculture that I dislike the most.
Oh, geez.
Well, you were just visiting Gary Zimmer. How did you make that the most productive visit?
Gary is a very unique teacher. Very, very, very unique. Basically, I was working on a biodynamic dairy in New Hampshire, and they had a big bookshelf, and I found a copy of The Biological Farmer, and I read the book, and I was like, that guy knows. He knows I have to go work with him. So I wrote him an email, and he wrote me back and said, come work on the farm. And when I showed up there, he said, you don't have to do anything. You could watch YouTube videos and read books, ride your bike, or do whatever you want. But if you want to, you can do this. So I did lots and lots of stuff, experiments, whatever I wanted to do, some things that he wanted to do. And Gary, people from all over the world come through Gary's place, through Otter Creek Farm. And so that was my capstone course, I guess, in agriculture, was people from South Africa, Ireland, Australia, here in the United States, all sharing ideas and, laughing and drinking wine. And so that was kind of my base. Post that, I continued to work on the farm there on Otter Creek, which is a very Very, very cool farm. Very cool farm.
So are you telling us find a guru?
What's that?
Are you telling us that we need to find a guru?
No, no.
Go camp out and just watch what they're doing?
I guess I did find a guru. People in here might disagree with some stuff that Gary has to say, or might not like his personality, but he's a master. So that's kind of what I was seeking out. I like people like Klaus Martins, you know, like that was on my list. I wanted to go work there, so I did. A lot of people don't have that opportunity, but you know, I worked vegetables and dairy and did agronomy work, and so I don't know it all, but I've seen a lot of stuff, and I've worked in a lot of different situations, and so that's how it works for me. And if people want to ask me, you know, I'm willing to share what I know with the knowledge that it's not gonna transfer everywhere perfectly.
What I'm hearing is he went and worked at these places.
I did,
He didn't
yeah.
just visit the farm for an afternoon or a field day.
Right.
He saw the good, bad, and the ugly, the inner, you know, the inner details.
Yeah.
You know, the skeletons in the closet he observed, and that would probably be much more helpful than just seeing the guru for an afternoon.
And there is, I mean, I spent my 20s building, you know, experience equity rather than actual monetary equity. You know, a lot of those farms I made like $800 a month. Through my 20s, you know, those are some decent earning years. Doesn't have to be, but that's what I chose to do. Yeah, I guess if you find a guru who doesn't farm, I would be suspect. Or hasn't. And ask why they aren't anymore.
You want to comment, Will, on how you translate, when you meet someone who's doing really interesting stuff, how do you translate it into useful ideas for you?
I normally try to start small. So if I see a cool idea, and I'm blessed with a landlord who is willing to let me experiment, and she's open and excited about new trials. So I'm really blessed there. But I always try to do something small, and a lot of it has to do. You know, Gary's been a mentor to me since I started farming, and I was going to go start farming just like Gary, so I did it just like Gary, but I didn't do it just like Gary because I'm not Gary, and then that ended up, it dinged me a little bit. Now I got to figure out how to farm like Will because I'm Will.
You don't want to be me. Well, where do I start here? First off, I started farming following the proven system of farmers in Iowa and a few in Illinois. And the systems worked. And I've done that system over and over and over and over again until I keep perfecting the art. And so I'm not really looking for a guru. And anybody that thinks that a soil test is the way to fix your soil, I run from it. Okay, because when you take a soil test and you add something, you're treating a symptom. A symptom because of your ignorance. The soil is a living creature. It will fix that. It doesn't say in the Bible, in the beginning, there was a university professor from the University of Illinois that went out with his AA or his Super A, whatever they call that thing, and spread phosphorus and potash, so we got this beautiful soil with a lot of topsoil. We didn't build this soil. The infinite creator did. And that's how I'm going to build it. I'm going to be his slave and part of his system and one of his little creatures to be the higher animal to help the little guys in the soil that are going to do that anyway. Okay? So I've never tested soil. I'm going to let the soil building build the soil test. I'm not going to take the soil test and try to build the soil. That's like putting a new set of tires on thinking it's going to fix a leak in your radiator. Does that make any sense to anybody, or am I crazy?
It's making some sense to me. I mean, it's food for thought. As you guys leave, there are lots of ideas we've heard, but that's certainly a nugget to think about.
I love the idea that Will used the term mentor instead of guru. A guru is somebody you go and see at a conference and pay them some money, and then you leave. A mentor is somebody you have a continuing relationship that benefits both of you.
Okay. One of the things that we are thinking about at the research farm is how to work with the traditional systems, but also try some out-of-the-box type of things like the 60-inch rows, the intercropping. How do you, I mean, Will already mentioned that he tries things on a small scale, but do any of you want to share any thoughts on how you screen these ideas that are way outside the box and find something that's worth giving a try?
Intercropping is legit right now. And when, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, when was it, Lauren, when we had that event 3 years ago? And how many people talked about relay cropping before that time? And look at the exponential growth. And the internet is producing, and when you look at relay cropping and intercropping, I think you're seeing virality around a cropping system based on social forces on the internet that is really amazing. But yeah, I'm up for anything. And the crazier the idea, the better in some ways.
Well, one thing that I talk to my students about all the time is their conservative older relatives, because they get pushback when they bring home ideas. I'm always encouraging my students to talk to their family members, interview their family members about things, but not just ask about what they are doing, but also ask about, would you try cover crops? Would you try organics if a landlord asked you? And they get, all sorts of interesting responses. Who are the people in your lives that are that conservative voice, but a productive conservative voice that help you be more of a critical thinker, help you avoid disasters?
I need that person in my life.
Wow. I started back in the year where you were crazy if you farmed this way. It was not cool. Okay, so you had everybody telling you were going to deplete the soil. And there was a guy named Dr. Bill Becker come out to the farm. I'd never met him before, but he had heard about me because word gets out fast back in the 80s if you were going to be crazy enough to farm this way. And the farm that I farmed that was bank managed, they didn't want anything to do with me. They made sure they got that farm to give to somebody else, which was fine with me. The feeling was mutual because I didn't like when a rotary hoed the crops, my eyes burning because of the chemicals you put on the soil. And so anyhow, Dr. Bill Becker come out to watch the collapse of the soil because I wasn't going to put on any NP and K. See? And back then I didn't use any chicken litter. We started out with a lignin coal, which is similar to the humate product that Todd sells over here. But anyhow, as Dr. Bill Becker watched the soil test get better and better and better and better, later on when I was talking to him, he was presenting at Jack Ariston's field day, he said that I turned his life upside down because those things weren't supposed to happen. That wasn't what he was taught, but when the Potash Institute and the Fertilizer Institute putting the funding in for people to do research, it's going to change a little bit what's found, okay? So anyhow, Dr. Bill Becker, another thing he said that I was shocked about, I didn't know, he said the best soil test he'd ever seen in his career was on that farm I'd been depleting for 10 years, okay? Now, another thing, when you go back, he wanted to sell me consulting services while he was on the farm, and I refused. What would have happened if I would have agreed to that? What would have happened? Would he have had the opportunity to see the best soil test he'd ever seen in his career? We are here, and we have responsibility to feed that soil. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it?
You grew up on an organic
Yeah,
farm.
I grew up on an organic farm. And I remember being 14 years old and running a cultivator and having a lot of lightning strikes. But no, I'd say I get a lot of pushback from my dad, who was an early innovator into organic agriculture back in 2002. It wasn't near as early as Gary or Jack, but compared to a lot of people now, that was pretty early. And he moved into organic, and now that I'm looking at no-till practices and multi-species cover crops, he's looking at me like, oh, you sure that's going to work? And so it is kind of a funny dynamic.
yeah, I need that person as well. That person doesn't exist for me. It stops with me, so there's no conservative tamping down. It's mostly what limits
So
me.
the in-laws are totally in on all this.
Yeah, it was before I got there, it was no-till, hog confinement, spray it down, corn and beans. So yeah, it changed their world. But I have to say they're not really conservative people. They're set forever. It doesn't matter if the farm succeeds or fails, they'll be fine financially. So it's see what you could do. And that's a lot of pressure. So that's what limits me in trying new and different things. Like I ended up with 300 acres of teff grass that wasn't in the plans this year. Those kind of things just happened. But as far as getting too crazy, I don't do any like intercropping or anything like that. I'm pretty just basics. I just try to do the basics really well.
Okay. Guys, I think we need to transition. Does anybody have a last burning question? Andy, right, before we transition to the Allison farm, where is Casey? Casey, why don't you come up here? Andy is intimately involved in everything that we're doing in terms of research. I bounce all these ideas off of him, and he's a good conservative sounding board for me. What are you thinking? As you hear all this, do you have any questions for these people? Do you hear about something that you think we should try at the Allison farm? Maybe. Keep thinking about that. We'll have that discussion. Anyway, so Casey, why don't you come on up? Where's Casey? There she is. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank Joel and Andy for inviting me. I work at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture as the organic specialist, and I just wanted to let you know about our organic conference. It happens on January 10th and 11th, 2019, in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We have about 600 attendees, 36 educational sessions, and an 80 vendor trade show. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. Thanks.
Does anybody else have a burning message they want to share with this audience? This is an amazing audience, so you have an opportunity to share a word.
Yes, I have a question for Will specifically. I was stoked to hear you mention Lean Farm. I'm like a small scale vegetable grower, and I would love to see the rift kind of close between like large scale farmers, whether they're organic or conventional, and us, earth-loving folks growing little bits of peppers here and there. So what did you learn from Lean Farm that you feel like is a huge blind spot for people out in a field with a combine that they need to hear?
I think Eric said this already, is organic farmers fall into, they kind of get sucked into having a specific tool for each problem. And I think if we clean up the farm and do a really good job of using the tools that we have, then we don't have to have all those tools, and we can actually be better farmers because of it. That's probably what, and to get rid of all that stuff.
It's sometimes much easier to think there is a missing puzzle piece rather than you and your skill at making decisions being the main thing that's missing, right? We feel like we need that other tool, we need that input, and obviously those things are useful. But the most important thing is how you make decisions. If you can make better decisions, you will use whatever the technology is more effectively.